Let's bring in Democratic Congressman Donald McEachin of Virginia. Last month, he held 2 town halls on behalf of the March for Our Lives movement. Of course, that was organized by those brave students in Parkland, Florida. Congressman, I'm glad to have you here, and I want to put up a tweet that you sent out yesterday, and here's what you said. When will this Republican-controlled government allow us to act to protect our kids? Children's blood is on their hands. I understand your frustration, but before we get all the facts, are you willing to concede that some shootings simply can't be stopped through legislation?
You know, there's no piece of legislation that can stop all shootings, but we have to pass something. We have to take some actions to try to correct this horrific problem. We need to study the problem, for instance. This Republican Congress won't even allow us to study the problem. We should be thinking about actions like, in this case, for instance, this young man got a hold of his father's gun, or at least that's what's alleged. Was that gun properly secured? And if that gun wasn't properly secured, the father there should be some consequences for the father. Maybe not criminal consequences, but certainly civil consequences ought to be in order. There are a lot of things that we can be doing. You know, when we are confronted with terrorism, we act immediately. You know, a terrorist tries to blow up a plane with things in his shoe. All of a sudden, all of us are taking off our shoes as we go through the airport, as we go through security. We need to have that same sort of reaction, that same sort of sense of urgency when it comes to gun violence in our schools. There have been 22 shootings on campuses that I know about, at least, in 20 weeks. That's more than one a week in our country in this year. That's horrific.
Yeah, and there are reports that there are as many as 214,000 school kids who've been exposed to gun violence while in school since the Columbine shooting. I mean, that's almost 250,000 kids that are around this country. So it's tragic and it's unthinkable. But I want to play for you what Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick said at the press conference yesterday. Here's that, sir.
Maybe we need to look at limiting the entrance and the exits into our schools so that we can have law enforcement looking at the people who come in 1 or 2 entrances. We're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to think out of the box, because from what we know, this student walked in today with a long coat and a shotgun under his coat. It's 90 degrees. Had there been 1 single entrance possibly for every student, maybe been stopped.
What do you make of that?
Well, yes, we need to think outside the box. I don't know if limiting entrances and exits to schools are necessarily the most safest way to go about.
I'm thinking of a fire alarm. I mean, you have one entrance. I mean, a fire alarm was what started this whole thing yesterday. So anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted, though.
No, but you're making my point. You need multiple exits to make sure that children can get out in case of an emergency. So 1 or 2 exits, I don't think, is the answer. Being creative and thinking outside the box, yes, we absolutely need to do that.
All right, let's turn now to the Russia investigation, and I want to get your take on the New York Times and Washington Post, both of those reports on just how the FBI used an informant. It was back in the early days of the investigation, and sources tell the news outlets the informant reached out to Trump campaign aides, those being Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, and Sam Clovis, who was a co-chair of the campaign. Do you think that moves the needle in this investigation in any significant way?
No, because at the end of the day, the question is, and that's what we need the Mueller investigation to tell us, is, was there wrongdoing? The fact that there was an informant in the Trump campaign, if that is true, doesn't move the needle in the least bit. The question is, were you engaged in conspiracy with the Russians to undermine the American elections? Were you ultimately doing things that you should not have been doing? Those are the questions that need to be asked and answered.
I want to have you put these reports about the source in the context of the efforts by both the president and Republicans on Capitol Hill to try to reveal this source's identity. I'm sure you've heard FBI Director Wray's comments on that. How do you feel about that?
Well, I agree with the director. You know, we, and as well as your last guest, we in Congress cannot demand or ought not to demand the names of informants in the way that the Republicans are That's really putting self-interest over national interest. There are a lot of national interest implications when it comes to revealing sources. Some of these folks may be tied up with other international agencies of our allies. We can't just go about this willy-nilly. It's dangerous and it's unnecessary.
All right. One more question before I let you go, sir, and that being the latest on how you think Democrats are going to approach the issue of impeachment. I know a few of your colleagues are holding an impeachment rally here in New York this weekend. So how do you see this playing out politically as we approach the midterms?
Well, you know, what we as Democrats ought to be doing is talking about our vision for America. That is a better deal, whether it's a better deal for Americans when it comes to health care, a better deal when it comes for Americans when it comes to gun safety, a better deal for Americans when it comes to the environment. It is premature to be talking about impeachment, especially in the absence of the Mueller investigation's final findings. So I hope my colleagues will speak to Americans and to their constituents, to where they are, to the issues that concern them, to those kitchen table issues that Americans wrestle with every day.
All right. Well, Democrat Congressman Donald McEachin.